Captain Midnight.
I have a lot of thoughts on Space Jam: A New Legacy, but I want to say up front that I didn't want to come at this movie from the perspective that the first film is some sort of artistically pure, untouchable classic that no sequel could ever live up to. Because despite loving it as a kid, I don't think that's the case. The first Space Jam was always a pretty blatant brand exercise that squished together two big things, Looney Tunes and Michael Jordan, into one merchandise money printing machine. It literally only exists because of a series of successful Nike commercials. I wanted to acknowledge that before talking about the new movie because I'm about to criticize this one a lot more harshly. Because here's the thing, Space Jam 2 seems like such a cynical marketing ploy designed to boost HBO Max and the Warner Brothers brand that the movie itself almost seems to realize it's gone too far. The title of this video may seem a little extreme, but honestly, I think the film earns it. This movie kinda seems to despise its own premise, and while I'm sure that most kids won't mind, it did make for some pretty fascinating viewing as an adult.
Sleep around here? What's all the racket? What's up? What's up?
So the basic gist of the movie, very quickly, is that LeBron James and his son get trapped in Warner Brothers servers by an evil algorithm. This algorithm, named Al G Rhythm and played by Don Cheadle, tells LeBron that he has 24 hours to assemble a team of Warner Brothers characters and then face off against his gamer son in basketball. The plot doesn't really matter that much because it basically is just there to provide an excuse to show us around the serververse. A word you will hear in this movie over and over and over again. A universe where all the Warner Brothers properties you know and presumably recognize exist at once. There's something grim about this concept, I think. The Looney Tunes, a funny and beloved series of shorts that date back almost a century now, don't exist in their own reality or even in the little underground hidden world of the first Space Jam. They all exist inside of an endless row of servers in Warner Brothers' basement. And you're reminded over and over again that the Looney Tunes, along with everything from Austin Powers to The Matrix to Game of Thrones, are all property of Warner Brothers. The actual context of who created them and when doesn't matter. That's completely incidental to the fact that they're all part of this almighty brand. When they show scenes from Casablanca or The Matrix, there's nothing clever or funny happening there. Where the old Looney Tunes shorts were happy to poke fun at movie stars and homage famous films, Space Jam 2 just has the characters say famous lines or do exactly what happened in the movie. In the old shorts, when Bugs Bunny donned the persona of a noir detective, the animators were actually using their love of Humphrey Bogart movies to generate jokes. But there's no jokes to be had in Granny jumping like Trinity from The Matrix. It's just a recreation of the scene, but with a new character in it. And because that character is an old lady, I guess that's just supposed to be joke enough. I mean, come on, kids deserve better entertainment than this. And the weird thing is, Space Jam 2 itself seems to agree with me, at least to some extent. There's a scene early on where LeBron James goes by the Warner Brothers lot to hear a pitch created by the villain, which basically amounts to sticking him in other WB-owned properties. We see Harry Potter LeBron, Game of Thrones LeBron, you get the idea. And LeBron rejects it, saying the whole concept is terrible. And that scene just plays so weirdly in the context of this movie. Because that pitch that he hates, that's basically just the movie he's in. There is almost no difference between the cartoon version of him being in Game of Thrones and inserting him into scenes of Fury Road later on. But one is presented as this terrible idea, and the other is supposed to be a funny scene that we laugh along with. It's just kind of weird. I guess it would be possible to mount a defense of the movie and say, hey, that scene in the boardroom is just WB having some fun at their own expense. The movie being self-aware and satirizing its own existence. And I'm sure that's what they're trying to do, but it's satire with absolutely no bite. I would have respected it at least a little bit if LeBron actually said why he doesn't like the pitch. That it looks completely soulless and corporate, driven only by algorithms seeking a decent profit margin. But nothing even close to that kind of point is being made, so I don't think Space Jam 2 really has a sense of humor about itself. It just knows that it needs to be just self-aware enough to get away with being as cynical of an ad for HBO Max as it is, and still get away with it. But I think that's kind of why this movie ends up feeling like it hates itself. Because while the algorithm is the villain of the film, this movie ends up feeling exactly like the product of one. Plugging in a famous TV show here, quoting a classic movie there, all in service of reminding the viewers that we can check out all of this stuff and more on their streaming service. It's also a movie that doesn't seem very interested in the Looney Tunes themselves. It gestures and references some of the most famous shorts, but it doesn't really ever attempt to tap into what made them special. Starting in the early 30s, a team of gifted animators began creating characters and crafting character dynamics that are still used almost 100 years later. They did this without much oversight from Warner Brothers themselves, who saw their animated shorts division as pretty unimportant and allowed them to basically just do whatever they wanted, in a rundown building that came to be known as Termite Terrace. Eventually, legendary animators like Chuck Jones and Bob Clampett came aboard, expanding on the characters and creating even more of their own. And while yes, they were made for kids, I think many Looney Tunes shorts stand up as some of the most clever, fast-paced, and visually interesting pieces of animation to come out of the 20th century. A Bugs Bunny short won an Oscar in 1959, but I think they almost certainly deserved a few more. But who we find in Space Jam 2 are more shells of those characters than anything. And that may seem like a goofy complaint. I mean, I understand that these are slapstick cartoon characters, but what defines them are their dynamics. One of the parts of this movie that actually got a laugh out of me was everyone looking for Tweety only to find them in Sylvester's mouth. It was like the movie remembered for once what these characters' relationships are to each other. For almost the entire rest of the movie, that's forgotten or just tossed to the side. Yosemite Sam and Bugs Bunny getting along and not even acknowledging that one wants to kill the other kind of defeats the point of having them both in your movie. That kind of thing is the entire foundation of these characters, and without putting those dynamics in the forefront, they become pretty interchangeable. Which makes sense, because even if a director like Joe Dante was able to pull it off really well in Back in Action, these characters were never actually meant to be in the same feature together. Like, their shorts were separate with only a little crossover here and there. They aren't some giant comedy team built to bounce off each other. But hey, at least most of the tunes, and even LeBron, get a chance to do some animated silliness. Even if it isn't the best Looney Tunes material in the world, that's something. Except, of course, for Lola Bunny. A character created for the first Space Jam, she doesn't have the long history that most of the other characters do. This could have created a really fun opportunity for the filmmakers. They had the opportunity to really put their own spin on the character. And what they came up with is, she does nothing at all funny, tells no jokes, and has no personality beyond being determined. Honestly, if I was Zendaya, I would be very annoyed with my role here. You get a chance to play a Looney Tune, to go big and over the top, but you end up having to play the boring voice of reason who barely gets any lines? If they actually wanted to overhaul this character, why not let her be as chaotic, fun, and goofy as the rest of the gang? Also, this is kind of a dumb side tangent, but I was really confused why Wonder Woman and Lola weren't in DC World along with the rest of the DC characters. If you have an explanation for this, I'd really like to read it. Like, I guess they were supposed to be in a comic book, but if that's the idea, they executed that really poorly, because they aren't really drawn like a Wonder Woman comic either. I have a bunch of other story issues too, but at the end of the day, I'm not looking for some incredibly airtight script from a Looney Tunes movie. I just want brilliantly constructed chaos. But this movie feels far too much like a piece of marketing and a carefully controlled product to really accomplish that. Another moment that really made me wonder how much the people making this movie actually hate it comes when the whole gang are turned into CG versions of themselves. I think it looks bad, but to be fair, the 2D animation looks pretty mediocre here too, looking a little like Flash animation. It actually looks worse than that recent Looney Tunes show they have on HBO Max, which was actually pretty solid. Anyway, in one of the film's weirder choices, it treats this transformation to 3D like a scene from a body horror movie. Like the movie knows that converting these characters to 3D models kind of sucks, but they need to do it anyway because they believe it's what modern audiences want. If the movie leaned into that and had something interesting to say about how the Looney Tunes don't really fit into the current world of animation, that would really be something, but it doesn't. So that scene just kinda sits there, giving you the sense that everyone involved in making this movie, even Bugs Bunny himself, didn't want to be there. Which makes sense, considering it had a really troubled production that included the firing of its first director.
This is no way for a pampered superstar to travel.
What the shoes?
Algae Rhythm may be the villain of this movie, but every second of the film itself just feels like the only reason it exists is because an actual algorithm told them that it would be a surefire hit. Space Jam was never Looney Tunes at its best, far from it, but it at least mostly feels like an actual Looney Tunes movie compared to this, where the Looney Tunes are basically nothing more than our guides on a giant tour of all the hits that WB owns. And I can see the excuses now. The excuse will be that this is just entertainment for kids, so who cares if it's any good? Well, the teams who made the classic Looney Tunes shorts did. They poured countless hours into creating memorable comedy that people of all ages remember nearly 100 years later. I'd be surprised if anyone was talking about Space Jam 2 next month.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.